The summer air in my hometown always smelled of pine and dust, a sharp contrast to the salty, humid ocean air I had grown used to over the last 8 years. I had just returned home on a rare, extended leave after a grueling deployment overseas. As a Navy SEAL, I had operated in some of the most hostile environments on Earth, hunting shadows and surviving on pure instinct. But nothing could have prepared me for the tactical threat waiting for me inside my own childhood home. My father had passed away years ago, and my mother, a gentle woman who always saw the best in people, had recently remarried. His name was Marcus. On paper, he was a retired businessman with a charming smile and deep pockets. But the moment I stepped through the front door and shook his hand, my military training kicked in. His grip was too calculated, his eyes too cold, and he carried himself with the stiff, arrogant posture of someone who used intimidation to get what he wanted. He didn't know anything about my real career. My mother only knew I was in the military, keeping my SEAL status classified for her own peace of mind. To Marcus, I was just a quiet, unassuming kid home from a desk job. The tension in the house boiled over on my third night there. It was late, around midnight, and the house was quiet except for the muffled sound of an argument coming from the kitchen. I slipped out of bed, moving soundlessly down the hallway, a habit ingrained in my DNA. I pressed myself against the wall just outside the kitchen door, listening. Marcus was furious. His voice was a low, vicious snarl, entirely stripped of the charming facade he wore during the day. He was demanding that my mother sign over the deed to our family home and empty her life savings into a private account he controlled. When my mother tearfully refused, saying that money was meant for my future, I heard the terrifying sound of a heavy glass shattering against the counter, followed by my mother's sharp gasp of terror. Then came the words that changed everything. Marcus stepped closer to her, his voice dropping to a chilling, venomous whisper. He told her that he was tired of playing nice, that he had powerful connections, and that if she didn't sign the papers by tomorrow morning, he would make sure both she and her pathetic soldier boy son disappeared without a trace. He explicitly threatened to kill us, boasting about how easy it would be to stage an accident in this sleepy town. My blood turned to ice, not out of fear, but out of absolute, lethal focus. In the dark zone, a threat like that is an act of war. Marcus was a predator who preyed on the weak, but he had no idea he had just walked into the territory of an apex predator. Instead of bursting in and escalating the situation while my mother was cornered, I chose tactical patience. I quietly melted back into the shadows of the hallway and returned to my room, my mind instantly shifting into operational mode. I didn't sleep a wink. Instead, I spent the next few hours subtly preparing the environment. I mapped out the blind spots in the house, checked the exit routes, and waited for dawn. When morning came, the atmosphere in the house was suffocatingly tense. My mother looked pale, her eyes red from crying, while Marcus sat at the dining table, sipping his coffee with a smug, victorious grin. He looked at me, his eyes filled with utter contempt, completely unaware that the quiet man sitting across from him had survived firefights against seasoned terrorists. The moment of truth arrived shortly after breakfast when my mother went upstairs to gather some documents. Marcus seized the opportunity. He leaned across the table, his eyes boring into mine, and decided to drop the act completely. He casually flashed a heavy tactical knife he had concealed under his jacket and whispered that I needed to convince my mother to sign the papers today, or he would personally ensure that neither of us lived to see the weekend. He thought he was terrifying a helpless kid. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I simply looked him dead in the eye and said, "You're making a catastrophic mistake." Before Marcus could even process my words, he lunged across the table, driven by blind rage and the arrogance of a bully. But his movements were painfully slow compared to the threats I was trained to neutralize. In a fraction of a second, my muscle memory took over. I sidestepped his clumsy attack, caught his extended wrist, and applied a brutal, agonizing joint lock that forced him to drop the knife instantly. Before he could even scream in pain, I swept his legs out from under him, slamming his heavy frame hard onto the hardwood floor. I pinned him down, driving my knee deep into his spine and locking his arms behind his back with absolute control. Marcus gasped for air, his face pressed against the floor, his arrogance evaporating into pure panic. He tried to struggle, but the grip I had on him was unbreakable. I leaned down close to his ear, keeping my voice terrifyingly calm and steady. I told him exactly who I was. I told him I was a Navy SEAL, that I had hunted men far more dangerous than him for breakfast, and that his little criminal games were officially over. I made it clear that if he ever looked at my mother again, or if he even breathed the same air as my family, I would hunt him down to the ends of the earth and use the full extent of my training to erase him. By the time the local police arrived, whom I had quietly speed-dialed right before the confrontation, Marcus was weeping, completely broken and begging the officers to take him away from me. As they led him out in handcuffs, exposing his long history of fraud and spousal abuse to the authorities, my mother stood beside me, trembling but safe. I wrapped my arm around her, the adrenaline fading, replaced by a deep sense of relief. Marcus wanted to play a deadly game, but he learned the ultimate lesson the hard way: never threaten a family when their son is a shadow in the night.